welcome to session 2 of the forum. This one, I wanted to really talk about self-expression today, or I guess a subcategory of self-expression, which is hiding your intent. I think that's something that I've seen a lot with my students, especially the guys that are really new to this. This idea of hiding your intent seems to crop up all the time. Like almost, pretty much consistently 100% of guys who are within the first 0 to 6 months of their kind of development in this, have this issue with constantly hiding what it is that they're doing, you know. So I guess some quick examples of that are, for example, if you're on the street and you've got, say if you've got a girl there, right, and I'll send a guy to approach her, and so if she's kind of facing that way, they'll kind of wander around in front and they'll kind of be looking away from her, almost kind of giving her his back, you know, and just out of nowhere he'll just kind of turn around and just kind of open, you know. Any kind of variation of that is what I mean by hiding your intent, and most guys kind of couple that with some sort of indirect opener, like directions or something like that, you know. I've seen it in nightclubs as well. I used to do this in nightclubs a lot when I first started. Yeah. So me and my wing, if there's like a group of girls there and there's like a bar, me and my wing would come up and just like, you know, stand pretty close to them. And like, you know, there's a big open space and stuff. And we'd stand close to them with our back to them, and we'd just be talking shit and like pretending like, you know, nothing's going on, and then like you do the turn and the open. Yeah. And by the time we actually opened them, they either have left already, or they know exactly what's going on, and they'll have some rebuttal ready, or they'll just shut you down immediately, or they'll turn their back on you before you even get a chance to open, you know. And I'm just seeing this cropping up a lot, and it's coming across as really weak, and it's something that if you don't get it handled, it tends to just creep into every other part of your game, that kind of attitude of trying to hide what you're doing, you know. I just want to preface or give some context around where I think that this whole thing's coming from. Back when the community was like super kind of young, and it was just forming, so like the kind of mystery method type days. I remember when I was reading The Game, Neil Strauss's The Game, like they were talking about mystery method and how it was all about indirect game, and essentially, I mean, you could kind of summarize mystery method as hiding intent, because that's essentially what they were doing. So they were going in there, you know, like opening indirect, nagging the target, and essentially trying to hide what they wanted and who they wanted for as long as possible, you know. And there's some guys even now that are coming from that era where they used to play like the gay card and stuff, you know. Yeah. Like they would play the gay card all the way up until sex, you know. And even then they were trying to hide what they were doing when they were kind of in bed, you know. And I mean, I have a feeling that that's where it's coming from, or that's where a part of it's coming from, and it's still lingering in the community. One of the important things to realize about the pickup community is that it has evolved a lot, and it's evolved really quickly in the last decade. So, for example, it's no longer specifically pickup. The community has broadened its horizons. It's gone more into self-development, and kind of pickup is still a large part of it, but it's a bit broader than just meeting women, you know. And so we have to kind of, I guess we have to kind of recognize that that's kind of what's going on, and that going with the whole development thing in the community, it's actually kind of evolved to a point where it's more about masculinity and showing your masculine side, rather than kind of, I guess, what these mystery method guys were doing, which was, I get a lot of guys say that they turned a little bit feminine, you know, and that's what a lot of the mystery method stuff was just turning a little bit more feminine. Whereas these days, I mean, the community is all about expressing yourself, your masculinity, and that's where this whole direct approach stuff has come from as well. I think it's just important to recognize that in terms of the history and where we're kind of coming from with all this. So yeah, cool. So you understand what I mean by hiding your intent. Now that's those two examples I gave, the street and then the nightclub, they're very obvious examples, and for me, and I'll get onto this later, when I see that in students, it tends to be a real kind of red flag and a real indication of what's going on in their internal psychology when I see them trying to hide stuff, you know. Yeah. But we'll get onto that a bit later. So firstly, I just want to acknowledge that if you've never really done this, or if you're very new to this whole stuff, this whole thing, it is your initial instinct to try to hide what you're doing, you know. And I've got a feeling from the guys that I've spoken to that a big reason why they got into the community is because of this issue of them, they can't express themselves, you know. So obviously it's going to come out when I send them into sets, you know. But I wanted to just acknowledge that is an initial kind of human reaction to hide it, but that's not a good enough excuse to kind of not deal with it, you know. And one of the issues I wanted to bring up around this was this idea that it's very hard to diagnose this problem yourself. Self-diagnosis in this particular area is super hard. Just by the nature of where it tends to crop up in guys' progress at the very beginning, then they're not proficient enough at what they're doing to be able to recognize it while they're in set. You know, by the very nature of it. I mean, when you're approaching a girl, most of your mental energy is going into trying to hide your intent. You know, so you don't have the presence of mind to be able to spot this. And it'll manifest itself in the body language, in your opener, with your indirect opener, and the way you speak and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a really crucial point, that you might be doing it and you don't know about it. And we were talking before about you know, getting your sets filmed so you can kind of see yourself do, that's the kind of stuff that you get to see really quickly. If you're hiding in your intent, it pops up straight away in your video, you know. And the other issue is that you know, if you're at this level, there's a good chance that your wings don't even know that this is going on. You know, if you can't diagnose it yourself, there's a good chance that the guys around you can't either, and they're probably doing it as well. That's why I think that it's really important to bring this up and to get guys kind of present to this idea of hiding your intent. And it's really important, because this is where a coach can come in and show you this stuff, you know, and just point it out. Because if it is something that's just a little tweak that's needed, then it's a real shame to let this thing manifest itself. To manifest and grow into something much bigger than it deserves to be, you know. Cool. So I just want to quickly move into this as an indicator of internal state, of your internal psychology. Because it really is it's really an attitude. And if you have this attitude of I'm not comfortable with what I'm doing, or this isn't normal, if you have those kinds of attitudes to this whole thing, then it's going to obviously manifest itself in trying to hide what you're doing, you know. So for me, when I see students do this on the streets, especially if they're really new, I know what's about to come next, you know. So if I see them doing this at the very first kind of approach, then I know that they're gonna resist things like direct compliment openers. Very soon down the line, they're going to really resist that. And another really interesting point that comes out of this is that guys that have this issue also have a massive issue with closing sets. So asking for numbers, asking for instant dates and first and second dates and stuff. I find that really fascinating. It's a really kind of solid pattern that I've seen. Because if a guy can't, if a guy's not comfortable revealing what he's trying to do, then going for a close is exactly the same thing. Because if he goes for a number after an interaction, he's going to reveal his intent, you know. And so it's exactly the same thing. It's the same attitude that's manifesting itself later on down the line in the interaction, you know. And you see this in nightclubs and stuff as well, with guys trying to physically escalate, where they, you know, maybe they've opened indirectly and it's going really well. But there's that window of opportunity where they should be physically escalating on the girl, and they just don't. You know, they almost physically can't get themselves to do it. You know, they can't get their hands to move to actually grab her or go in for the kiss or whatever it is. You know, so it's really important to recognize that it's kind of like, it's like the tip of the iceberg. You know, if you see these small things of you trying to hide what you're doing, it really is an indication of a bigger problem that's going on underneath, you know. I find that fascinating. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I teach this stuff. I think it's really fascinating. And also that if you can kind of get to the bottom of it, you can really sort out a lot of issues around why you're not progressing up the scale, you know. I think that's another reason why it's really important to kind of get this stuff sorted out, get it sorted out early so that you can kind of move on. Now, the other thing I find really interesting with this particular topic of hiding intent is that a lot of guys tend to misdiagnose their problems because they're hiding their intent. And what I mean by that is, for example, like a couple of weeks ago at the Saturday Saga, I had a student who had never really done this whole thing before, right? He'd done maybe 10, 15 approaches. And so I sent him in. So you had the girl here, and he went in and he did the whole like kind of looking around thing, and then from there he actually tried to transition into a random conversation topic, right? And she kind of looked at him a bit strangely, and then kind of walked off, you know, and said, "Oh, I'm busy, I need to go." And so he came back to me, and I said, like, "Okay, so what's your analysis of that approach? What was the issue?" And he said, "Oh, you know, man, I just can't transition. I'm not good at transitioning. I need to sort out my conversation skills, you know." And I just said, like, and he'd been thinking this. He'd made up this sticking point for himself for like the last almost month and a half, you know. And it was all because he was trying to hide his intent with his approach. So he framed that interaction in such a way that he was like a tourist and he was looking for directions. And so when he tried to transition into a random conversation topic, it was incongruent to his target, you know. And then he made up something about how his transition skills were no good, or his conversation skills were no good, you know. And you'll see this across the board. So again, with closing, exactly the same story. So guys will make up something about how they can't close properly, or they don't know how to close, you know. It's not true. They're just hiding their intent and they're not comfortable with what they're doing, and so they make up some story about how they can't close. If you want to close, you just open your mouth and say, "I want your number," or "Give me your number," or whatever it is, right? But it's interesting how this particular issue really clouds guys' judgments on where they are, you know. If you're wasting time and energy on a sticking point you don't actually have, you're in a lot of trouble, you know, especially if you're convinced that that's your sticking point as well. It's a really dangerous thing to kind of, you know, that's a real deep rabbit hole that you can go down. Not only are you chasing something that's not there, but you're reinforcing hiding your intent, you know. So I just want you guys to keep that in mind when you're out in the field, especially for my students, that when we're out in the field, well, I'm going to be focusing on that for the guys that have that issue, you know. And for me, when I see this in a student, there's a few things that I know to expect that are coming up. You know, once we deal with this issue, there's going to be a few other things that come up. But it really is a red flag for me when I see this, because I tend to, when I do see this, I try to spot it as early as possible, and sort it out quickly, because it can really kind of grow into a real beast. This idea of a lack of self-expression and not getting to the habit of just saying what you think and doing what you want to do. Ways to deal with this. There's two kind of rough categories that this kind of behaviour falls into. So it can either be a technical issue. If it's a technical issue, then it tends to be something that's fixed a little quicker. So when I say a technical issue, I mean it's something that maybe if a guy has this technical issue of hiding his intent, he's not completely aware of it on any level, and it's just a subconscious thing that he's kind of doing. And it's kind of, it's usually just that he hasn't been shown how to approach in a way that's a bit more conducive to what he's trying to do. So if the girl's there, he'll kind of wander in front and then kind of turn, and all I need to do in that case, if it's just a technical thing, is just tell him, okay, just try to get eye contact as quickly as possible, instead of waiting for because what you're essentially doing is when you turn, you're waiting for the last possible minute to make eye contact with them. Whereas if she's there, you walk around, you just try to get eye contact immediately, and then just bring the shoulders around, face her, and bang, you're into the chat. And if it's a technical thing, then I can usually fix that really quickly with guys. So it's just a matter of a handful of approaches, just tweaking the logistics and the physicality of their approach, and then it's locked in, it's done, you know. And then they usually internalize that and then just move on. So ways that I deal with this when it's an attitudinal issue is a combination of things. It's a slightly more longer term thing that I deal with students, and I find that after a couple of sessions I can really knock down the intensity of this lack of self-expression, you know. But for me it's a combination of crazy openness, so I kind of really push the guys to really go super outside of their comfort zone and I get really unreasonable about that as well. So I'll really make sure that they're going for, they're saying stuff that's so ridiculous, it's so outside of their reality, you know. And I kind of get them to really push the boundaries with that. I combine that with some psychological reasoning stuff. So because it is largely in their heads what's going on and what's causing this issue, so I will sit down with them and kind of psychologically get to the bottom of what's causing it, and try to defeat some of their arguments with a bit of logic, essentially. Now I combine that with a bit of trial and error stuff. So there's some other like little bits and pieces that I use. I get guys to try a few different things on the street in sets and stuff. And then I kind of combine that with the first two, and I can usually get rid of it pretty quickly, you know. And it's great because it just clears up a lot of the issues that goes on in sets, like misdiagnosing your sticking points is a really big symptom of this hiding your intent issue, you know. But once you can clear this one up and start to be really straight with girls and kind of express what you want to say and do, then you can really start to deal with your sticking points, what your sticking points actually are, you know. So that's how I deal with it in my coaching. I just want to quickly just clear up a small, what's the word, I guess a misnomer with new guys. And that is when they approach girls, when they kind of just thinking about all this kind of stuff, they tend to have this idea in their heads that the women maybe don't know what they're trying to do or what they're after. And I guess one of the reasons why guys tend to use the indirect opener is that they're kind of trying to support this, they're trying to reinforce that idea, you know, that by approaching a girl and asking for directions, she might not know what I'm up to or what I want. And then from there I can like slowly kind of just shoehorn my way in to an interaction with her, and then maybe eventually down the line when she decides she likes me, I can then reveal that I like her, you know. And that's not how it works. Like I said, the mystery method stuff was kind of a really complicated and I mean effective way of doing it, but really long-winded, and it reinforced a lot of the stuff that I'm really against, like a lack of self-expression. You know, the MM stuff really reinforced a lack of self-expression. You know, I just want to make that clear to the guys that are super new at this, and that is, girls know what's up, they know why you're approaching them, and that's okay. It's okay that they know that. That's not the game. It used to be the game a long time ago. This idea about revealing what you want from them used to be the game, and so you could kind of hold that information from them as long as possible until they started giving you IOIs, and then you could start to give them back, you know. That's not the game anymore, and I don't want guys to fall into that trap for too long. I know it's natural at first, but it's useful to quickly move on from that mindset and move on to a much more helpful attitude to this whole thing, you know. So yeah, it's just important to know that there's no secret to what's going on. To an extent, there's certain girls that might be a bit unsure, a bit naive and stuff on the street, maybe, depending on how you're approaching. But definitely, I mean, obviously, definitely in clubs, if you're approaching girls, groups of girls or singles or whatever, they know what's up. And that's okay, that's fine. I kind of want that. It is a bit scary for the guys just coming in. Some of them have this issue of like, you know, if they know, then they won't like me and stuff like that, and that goes into a whole other kind of psychological kind of rabbit hole as to how you come to that conclusion. And I want to deal with that in another session. The last thing that I want to discuss with this whole topic is just to bring it back to the idea of self-expression. So hiding your intent in the ways that we're talking about today, kind of, it falls under the kind of big umbrella of self-expression. And hiding your intent is, as I said before, a lack of self-expression. Now, the idea of self-expression I want to deal wholly later, because that's a topic on its own that deserves its own kind of session. But I just want to mention this is kind of what the game these days tends to be about, is about self-expression and expressing your masculinity, you know, expressing your sexuality. that tends to be where the community is kind of heading towards, if not we're already there. That's kind of how it goes. So just quickly, in terms of hiding your intent, there are points where there are certain situations with certain girls where you would want to hide your intent. I think that's a bit more of an advanced topic, but just while we're roughly in that area, I just want to quickly bring up. Give some quick examples. Certain girls, just straight off the bat, certain girls just don't react well to it, to this idea of being really forward and direct. And that's kind of, that's just how it is, in terms of, if you're going to talk about a numbers game, there's certain girls out there who just don't respond to that regardless of the situation. And there's a whole bunch of things like their upbringing, their parents, the kind of friends they hang around with, the kind of personality, the disposition, just kind of dictates that they just don't get into that kind of stuff. And that's fine, there's some girls that need a bit more of a build-up, they need to kind of be eased into it. But for me, I found if you do this kind of stuff properly, they're few and far between, and I'll leave that up to you whether you want to, the guys that are really good at this can switch gears, I'm slowly starting to get there. I'm really working on this idea of being able to spot these girls, because to some extent you can spot them, and once you start to get a lot of tools under your belt, like kind of different ways of approaching girls, or different ways of kind of talking, different openers, etc., you can then start to mentally switch gears and kind of just know what tools to use for different girls. But I just want to stress that if you're new to this, as someone who's just kind of learning and you're in your first 6 months or the first 12 months of this, you just want to treat all the girls like they're going to want you to approach directly, and they're going to want you to declare your intent. I think that's a really useful mindset to have when you're first getting into this. Great. The other kind of scenario would be something like if there's some social pressure from, say, if you approach 2 sets or 3 sets in the street, or if you're approaching groups of girls in clubs, there's certain girls that won't, even though they want to reciprocate that kind of forwardness or that kind of whatever, they won't. They feel that they can't because they've got their friends around. And again, it's like once you start doing enough sets, you start to spot this stuff. You start to see this stuff, and you start to see the sets where potentially you need to tone it down a little bit. Or whatever, But again, I really find it a lot of fun when you're going into bigger sets to kind of just say exactly what it is that you think, especially if it's something sexual, I think that's a lot more fun than trying to finesse your way in, but it's all sorts of courses. And critically, there's some biological factors as well. That if you really get into some of the reading around this, there are some major biological factors that affect how women react to guys. Time of the month, where they are on their cycle, it can be a huge factor. Girls can be hornier at certain times of the month than others, and that's something that obviously you don't have that much control of. But I'm just saying that's another kind of situation where a girl wouldn't respond positively to potentially positively to the kind of approaches that we're talking about. Cool. Now the last thing I want to talk about was this idea that you don't have to adopt this permanently. So you don't have to be the kind of guy that is always declaring his intent up front and always riding in front of girls and like physically trying to get in their way, stopping them and being kind of dominant like that. You don't have to do that. I just think that for the guys getting started with this, they're coming in to the community for that specific reason, because they can't do that, If they could express themselves in that way, they would probably have done alright with girls. But the fact that they're here tells me something about how maybe that's a skill that they want to develop, even on an unconscious level. And so it's very important to really push that as much as possible, to really be the kind of guy that's always pushing to be as forward and as expressive as possible, as much as possible, in that first that early kind of growth period, because you'll really find that you progress up the ladder of kind of skill a lot quicker by kind of pushing yourself in that direction. And you can always calibrate back. You can always tone it down if you need to. But being cautious cautious about this and kind of slowly moving up the ladder is not the best mindset to have. You know, I just want you to know that if you can really push yourself to a point where you are in that zone of just being able to express yourself and not really care how the girls are going to react to it. If you can get to that kind of a point and just live in that zone for a little bit, and just see what it feels like, it's pretty amazing. It's a pretty amazing feeling, you know. You can apply it to nightclubs and stuff as well, where, you know, if you do a couple of sets in a row and you build a bit of social momentum, you start to get to a point where you don't care anymore and you just say whatever you want. And if you get a bad reaction, it's kind of funny. But I think you really need to be there and be comfortable being in that position for a while. And then from there, I think you can start to calibrate some stuff and tweak some stuff. But the thing is that once you've been there and you've been there for a while and you've kind of been training while you're in that zone, then you have no trouble getting back into that zone later. You know, there's nothing worse than seeing guys like kind of be too timid with this and kind of they just stunt their own growth. You know, they stunt their own progress by not pushing themselves. And that's why I think this idea of hiding your intent is something that needs to be diagnosed quickly, as early as possible, and rooted out as quickly as possible as well. And being unreasonable about getting rid of it so that you can move on, because it'll really unleash the kind of shackles from you to kind of get good at this quickly.